It was promoted as a masterpiece of the Saudi Crown Prince's vision. The plans to sell shares in the state-owned oil giant Aramco have been postponed. So, where does this leave Saudi Arabia's efforts to raise money and diversify its economy? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Richelle Carey. Saudi Arabia has reportedly delayed its plans to list shares of its state-owned oil company Aramco on the stock market. Media reports say the initial public offering has been postponed indefinitely, but the Saudi government has disputed this. The energy minister, Khalid al-Falih, says the government is committed to conducting the IPO at the appropriate circumstances and time. The plan to float around 5% of Aramco was expected to be the world's largest stock sale, and it lies at the heart of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's vision to transform the economy. But the government has faced widespread criticism for its crackdown on dissent and its military campaign in Yemen. So why is Aramco important? It was set up more than 85 years ago and has since become the largest oil and gas company in the world. It manages the kingdom's large oil reserves of over 300 billion barrels. Its average daily crude production is 10.2 million barrels a day. But there's no clear data on how much the company is worth. Some analysts say it could be valued at $1.2 trillion, significantly lower than the official figure of $2 trillion. As we have mentioned, Aramco was at the center of the Crown Prince's reforms. Well, to be implemented by 2030, the vision aims to diversify the Saudi economy and make it less dependent on oil. It includes building the world's largest sovereign wealth fund and a $500 billion economic city called NEOM. But in a move that was widely criticized last year, the Saudi Crown Prince arrested dozens of senior members of the royal family, government ministers, and businessmen in what he said was an anti-corruption drive. Most were released after giving up their assets or paying billions of dollars. The Crown Prince has also pledged to return Saudi Arabia to what he calls a moderate Islam. Women have been allowed to drive and attend sporting events, and an almost 40-year ban on cinemas and cultural events has ended. Let's bring in our panel here in Doha. Mahjoub Zweiri, director of the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University in Washington, D.C., Mohammed, Cherkaoui, professor of conflict resolution at George Mason University, and in Singapore, joining us on Skype, James Dorsey. He is a senior fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies at Nanyang Technological University. A welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining me. I'm actually going to start with the first question with all of you, and I'll go to you first, Mahjoub. Are you surprised by this delay?
To be honest, I'm not surprised of the decision was being now reported about the change of the plan about Aramco. And I would like actually to put all of this into a real context. We have to remember that the whole issue of Aramco is coming in a wide perspective, which is a political context, which started with the emerging or after the death of King Abdullah and the emerging of King Salman. From the day one of that era, it was clear that Mohammed bin Salman will be the next king after his father. And since that time, there was focus on two main issues. One is the debate about political reform need to be stopped and need to be redirected. And to be redirected, you need to create, to present or to suggest a new topic for the debate, and that was the economic reform. And the core of the economic reform was the Aramco story and the another details which basically emerged after that story. So I think there is nothing to be surprised about if we remember that this is the whole issue is about marking their era, King Salman and Mohammed bin Salman, that there is something important they are doing in the country under the main titles, political economic reform, to lead and to consider their era an important era comparing with the previous kings.
Okay, we're going to dig into some of the reasons you touched on some of them. Mohammed, are you surprised that this has been delayed indefinitely?
No, I'm not. And I think what has happened so far in deciding the fate of the Aramco IPO is a short, short picture, if you like, or a token of asking the big question: to what extent it reflects the dilemma of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And I think there is a difference between high expectations and the no so positive reality. And I think back in 2016, when he announced this deal, he was building his momentum to become future king, and therefore now the momentum is waning away. He and others in Riyadh expected to generate at least $100 billion of the 5% share of the company. However, to the best case scenario, analysts are predicting no more than between 50 and 75 billion dollars. So I think there is a mismatch between what Mohammed bin Salman foresees for his reform plan and his 2030 vision and the real assessment of world markets in terms of approaching or kind of keeping distance from this IPO. And I think there is also the political uncertainty, and most of the the adventures decided by Mohammed bin Salman either in Yemen, in Lebanon, also vis-a-vis Iran, have also shadowed this and have added to this uncertainty that certain global investors are now making a second reflection on whether to go forward toward this IPO offer or sort of by Saudi. We should also add that the fluctuation of the oil market and now the search for alternative energy is not on the side of the Aramco IPO at present time.
Okay, well, we'll come back to some of those issues, but James, I suspect I know your answer to whether or not you're surprised, because Mohammed actually used a word that you have written about. You said he, meaning Mohammed bin Salman, has been very good at creating expectations, but not as good at managing expectations. Do you think that's an appropriate description for how this has all played out?
Indeed. We've known for a considerable period of time that the IPO at very best would be delayed and may not ever happen. The problem with all of this is that Mohammed bin Salman has indeed been very good at creating expectations. But if you look at the last several months, multiple incidents, whether it's the arrest of the human rights activists, whether it's the various incidents in Yemen with the killing or the deaths of children and women and other civilians, or the spat with Canada, Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis have been reactive. They've been behind the cart instead of in front of the cart. So with other words, if you're clear that this IPO is not going to happen within the time frame that you initially had announced, then you're going to be strongest if you're up front with managing the publicity and the expectations in terms of the delay and what's going to happen. Mohammed bin Salman and the Saudis have not been able to do that.
Mahjoub, you mentioned this a little bit. Do you think that this is more of a financial and economic failing, or is this a political failing, or the two intertwined when you're talking about Saudi Arabia?
Actually, it is both, because Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman wanted to enter his era of being a king with the successes in hand. And that means basically he wanted, as my colleagues were mentioning, he presented an amazing expectation, and he was aiming or hoping that some of this expectation will be achieved while he's a crown prince, and then after that, when he becomes a king, he will have some achievements in hand. As we see the situation, the whole thing is coming from the gate of political change. I mean, they wanted a political change. That political change has two main pillars. One is the decisive storm in Yemen, which we saw the consequences of that and how much it's costly. And we saw the other pillar, which is basically the economic changes inside Saudi Arabia. Let's remember, the two main pillars is being decided top down. Basically, these are not a decision which rely on a popular demands. Of course, there was some anger against Iran in Yemen, Maybe people, they wanted a economic reform, but I'm not sure they wanted these things as were presented by the monarch in Saudi Arabia. So basically, what we see, what we are seeing so far is some, decisions were made in a political economic context, assuming those will bring some change or some achievements. Those will help Crown Prince. I'm not sure that all of this actually, have brought any kind of change or a serious change. Actually, with the criticism that the kingdom is facing from a human rights organization and from even the United States about what's happening in Saudi Arabia, these kind of achievements apparently are disappearing. And we are witnessing another dilemma that the kingdom is facing. And I think the decision made in last few days is adding more, chaotic situation to the situation which already was chaotic.
So
and I think, yeah.
Okay, for just a minute, I want to bring Mohammed into this conversation. So when you want to launch an IPO, you are inviting the world into your home, into your books, into a level of scrutiny that Saudi Arabia has never really faced or had to answer to anyone for. Do you think that they are prepared for that, Mohammed?
Well, it depends on when we ask this question. I remember back in 2016, early 2017, there was an influx of financiers and CEOs coming from all over the world to Riyadh, and some of them had to wait for 2 to 3 days to meet the representatives of Aramco. So to me, that was the apex or the highest level of this IPO that has created a lot of vibration in world markets. But now, I don't think that many CEOs would go to Riyadh searching for that meeting or that discussion. I would like also to add that if we consider this kind of yes or no question to whether there will be an Aramco IPO, it reflects badly on the political economy of Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman. And let me also add another factor that is now kind of hindering the momentum, which is Mohammed bin Salman was good at articulating what I call symbolic politics. A lot of symbolism, a lot of predictions, a lot of expectations. However, when it comes to the delivery of these promises, it seems that he cannot achieve much, let alone that the next 12 months between now and 2030 are not going to keep the same vibration or the same strength that he hoped for. Therefore, I think it's a matter of bad management and also not being aware that the global markets can have a different assessment. In other words, the difference between an inside-out expectation and outside-in assessment of what Aramco can deliver or cannot.
So, James, do you think that what Mohammed describing is Mohammed bin Salman's leadership style being, is it naive? Is it hubris? How would you describe it?
Well, I think it's not thought through. Let me just say a couple of things which, in response to what was just said by both speakers, if Mahjoub is going to allow me, I want to just fine-tune what he said. Mohammed bin Salman is about economic and social change in Saudi Arabia, not about political change. And he's about geopolitical change in the region. I think one of the problems with the approach, and Mohammed in a sense pointed that out, of Mohammed bin Salman, is that there's a difference between financiers, bankers, fund managers willing to come in, and people who are foreign direct investors. We've seen very little of the latter, and much of what Mohammed bin Salman wants to achieve depends not only on funding, but also on foreign direct investment. The third point I'd like to make is that while we're talking about a delay of an IPO is not the only alternative or only option available to Mohammed bin Salman. There is also the option of a private equity sale, for example, to the Chinese. Now, that would in many ways be easier. It would not give Saudi Arabia the publicity and everything that goes with an IPO, but it would give it the funding, and a lot less questions would be asked, or at least those questions would be asked in private rather than in public.
James, I want to follow up on that. Do you think that that's something that you could see Mohammed bin Salman and the royal family actually really considering another option besides this IPO? Or or do they have to save face?
Well, the option of a private equity sale, particularly to the Chinese, has been touted for a significant period of time. And the Chinese have actually hinted that they may be interested in that. So I think it isn't a real option. And in many ways, that is a way to save face, because what it is selling a stake in the company, whether you do that publicly or privately, in that sense, doesn't really matter.
Mahjoub, what role did the U.S. and Donald Trump perhaps inadvertently play in causing these challenges, these road bumps? And what I mean by that, Donald Trump obviously was excited about the IPO. He tweeted about it, et cetera, et cetera. But he's also put pressure on Saudi Arabia to pump more oil. That means cheaper crude oil prices. That lowers the valuation of the company. Was there a connection there?
You know, we may say there is a connection between what was happening in Saudi Arabia in the last 2-3 years, and especially after Trump came to power. And I think the connection was made between the Saudi Arabia and the American administration may indicate that there is a relation between all of that. But I do agree with you that the contradiction within the American foreign policy towards Saudi Arabia is itself becoming problematic to the Saudis, because basically they want to please the Americans, but they cannot have the revenue they expect, and with the pressure on them to to sell more and taking into consideration the price is down as well. So.
And pleasing the U.S. on a couple of different fronts, because there's the financial front, there's the oil front, there's the economics, and then there's also the human rights issues that with what's happening in Yemen, civilians being bombed. It seems that that's coming more and more to the forefront. Do you think that as this war in Yemen continues to drag on, there continues to be a public outcry about the alleged war crimes that are happening there, the civilians that are getting killed? Does that type of thing make launching an IPO and being so public more difficult for Saudi Arabia?
I think the cost of the Yemen war, whether it's financially or politically, is becoming a real burn on the shoulders of Saudis. And I think day by day, this become problematic to their policy and to their even domestic politics. Of course, we see sort of level of hypocrisy on American foreign policy towards what happened in Yemen, because we know that the Americans are involved in a way or other on that war, whether on
selling
logistics, selling weapons, providing information, regardless what is it. But they are involved. The level of involvement, we can discuss it, whether 10%, 20%, 50%, but there is involvement. And they can, someone that can ask them what is about this level of involvement in that war, if you are honest about the criticism of Saudi Arabia and the killing for the killing of Yemeni civilians. So I think there is a real cost the Saudis are paying King Salman and his son because of this war. And I think it is increasing rapidly. I mean, we see now the increasing criticism about what happened in Yemen, but also we see, and I think internally, I would argue that one of the reasons behind the changing of decision about Aramco is the war in Yemen, because let's remember, the Saudis want to control their own oil because this is the own source of revenue.
Sure.
If they want to sell the shares of Aramco, regardless the percentage, this means they will have another hands in that cake, and they don't want anyone to be partner on that cake. They want to have it for themselves, and they don't want anyone to upset them or to annoy them how to spend money
and tell them what to
sell
do.
The oil. Yes.
Okay, Mohammed, let me ask you this. So the Vision 2030, there are valid critiques of it, obviously, but if at the core of it is wanting to diversify your economy and not be so dependent on oil, that's a laudable cause. Other countries have had that same goal, but it's never that easy. What is the biggest challenge? Why is this always so difficult for countries to accomplish?
Well, first, there is merit in pushing for an economic reform in the next 12 years. But the question is how Saudi Arabia will proceed in implementing these reforms. Apparently, there is this idea of diversification of sectors and also moving toward technology. Saudi would like to have Silicon Valley, in its own territory. But the question is that now I think that if Aramco IPO cannot be put in the market while the oil prices are above $70, 3 years ago, oil price was just 35. So I'm wondering when it can benefit from the IPO and whether it is a solid investment in global markets. So I'm left with the ironic question that probably we are just creating dreams. Also, the other challenge within Saudi Arabia is this kind of intersector or cross-sector reform, or is just a top-down reform where you have certain companies that are seeking or benefiting from this diversification, while the bottom, now the unemployment rate stands at 12.9%, which is quite high. And this is 3 years after the announcement of the 2030 vision. So I think that there are certain contradictions between what we plan, what we publicize in front of cameras, and whether we can push them toward full implementation. Let alone that it seems to me that there is this dilemma of micromanagement. You have Mohammed bin Salman and his friends who are trying to control the whole economic reform. And this is not kind of a well thought or plan to move forward. Therefore, if micromanagement doesn't help, then when Saudi Arabia will open up to other approaches? So in other words, is there a real business model within the 2030 vision?
James, we're going to have the last question here, because you brought up a great point that social and political change are not really the same thing. Can Saudi Arabia launch a successful IPO without having some sort of significant political change?
I think we've got to be clear on what makes an IPO successful in this case. There are two issues. One are the economic issues, including the valuation of the company, which Mohammed bin Salman put at $2 trillion, and which has been long questioned. And that questioning of the valuation predates the pressure from President Trump with regard to the oil prices. The second level of consideration is the confidence you have in Mohammed bin Salman's ability to basically implement reform and Vision 2030. And what you've seen, and that's where the Yemen war comes in, it's not a direct bearing on the IPO as such, but what you've seen over the last several months is an inability to manage confidence and to manage expectations. And so the appetite to invest, if you're not certain that the reforms are going to go through and that that Mohammed bin Salman can be a leader in the process, then that undermines the chances of the IPO. And that's, I think, what we're seeing.
Which actually goes to Mohammed's point, too, that it's about sustaining the moment and the enthusiasm, and that the longer this goes on, perhaps the more that enthusiasm. Go ahead, James.
I think the way to look at this is this. Mohammed bin Salman was brilliant in creating expectations when he launched Vision 2030, when he lifted the ban on women's driving, when he introduced an entertainment industry. He was brilliant in having the high ground when he visited the United States and Europe and was able to dominate the media with his message. And what we're seeing right now is exactly the opposite. And that works against him and against the Saudi chances of succeeding in this.
All right, James, that will be the final word. Thank you all for joining me. I appreciate it. Mahjoub Zweiri, Mohammed Cherkaoui, and James Dorsey. And thank you for watching. You can see the program again anytime if you go to our website, aljazeera.com. You can also go to our Facebook page. It's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can join the conversation on Twitter @AJ Inside Story. From me, Richelle, Carey, and the entire team. Bye for now.